Here we'll learn some key facets of endocrine physiology. To begin, start a table and denote that hormones are secreted by specialized cells, usually epithelial cells, transported via the blood. They bind with receptors on other tissues, and they initiate physiological responses. Generally, hormones are responsible for long term regulation of metabolism, growth, development, reproduction, and management of the internal environment, for instance, temperature. For contrast, consider that neural mechanisms trigger rapid, short term responses. With these general principles in mind, let's draw some key endocrine structures and list a few of their products. First, outline a human form. Then draw the hypothalamus and pituitary gland. Write that the hypothalamus synthesizes antidiuretic hormone, ADH, also referred to as vasopressin, corticotropin-releasing hormone, CRH, and gonadotropin-releasing hormone, GnRH, amongst others. Notice that many of the hypothalamic hormones include the word releasing, an indication of the hormone's action. Make a notation that releasing means it stimulates the release of another hormone from another endocrine source. Inhibiting means that the hormone blocks the release of some other hormone. A key target of hypothalamic hormones is the pituitary gland, which is structurally and functionally divisible into anterior and posterior lobes. Indicate that though the posterior lobe of the pituitary gland does not synthesize hormones, it does release antidiuretic hormone, which, as we've indicated, is synthesized by the hypothalamus. We'll learn the details of the hypothalamic pituitary system elsewhere. Write that the anterior lobe synthesizes adrenocorticotropic hormone, ACTH, growth hormone, GH, thyroid stimulating hormone, TSH, and the gonadotropins, follicle stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone. As you might have guessed, the names of these hormones tells us their effects on target organs. For example, thyroid stimulating hormone stimulates the thyroid gland. Next, indicate that the thyroid gland, which is the butterfly or bow tie-shaped gland in the neck, produces the thyroid hormones, T3 and T4, as well as calcitonin. Show that the four small parathyroid glands, which are on the posterior aspect of the thyroid gland, secrete parathyroid hormone, PTH. As we'll learn elsewhere, this hormone regulates calcium levels. Now draw the heart and indicate that specialized cells within it secrete atrial natriuretic hormone, also referred to as atriopeptin. This hormone is secreted in response to atrial distension to increase sodium and water excretion in the kidneys. Now indicate that the kidneys secrete erythropoietin and renin. Erythropoietin stimulates red blood cell production, and renin aids in blood pressure regulation. Draw the adrenal gland, which rests on the superior surface of the kidney. This mass of endocrine tissue comprises an outer cortex and an inner medulla. Write that cortisol is produced in the cortex. As we'll learn elsewhere, cortisol and other glucocorticoids regulate blood glucose levels. Epinephrine, which is also referred to as adrenaline, and norepinephrine, referred to as noradrenaline, are released from the adrenal medulla. These catecholamines operate in coordination with the sympathetic division of the autonomic nervous system, as part of the fight or flight response. Across from the kidneys, draw the stomach and indicate that specialized cells throughout the gastrointestinal tract secrete hormones that aid in digestion and metabolism. Gastrin and secretin are two examples. Then show the nearby pancreas and indicate that pancreatic isolates secrete insulin and glucagon, which are hormones that regulate blood glucose levels. Lastly, show that the gonads produce large quantities of the reproductive hormones. The testes are a major source of the androgens, particularly testosterone in males, and the ovaries are a major source of progestins and estrogens. Be aware that this is a simplistic diagram that does not include all endocrine tissues or the complex interactions between endocrine tissues. For example, fat tissues also synthesize and secrete hormones, and although the testes produce relatively large quantities of androgens, the adrenal cortex and ovaries also contribute to androgen levels. Let's take a moment now and organize the numerous hormones into three key classes: peptides and proteins, which vary in size. These are derived from amino acids and are synthesized throughout the body. Denote the following examples: insulin, which comes from the pancreatic islets; growth hormone, from the anterior pituitary gland; and parathyroid hormone. Steroid hormones are derived from cholesterol, which is present in food and produced endogenously. Steroid hormones are primarily produced in the adrenal cortex and gonads, where we showed that cortisol and the reproductive hormones are produced. Amines, which are derived from tyrosine in the adrenal medulla and thyroid gland. We saw that the adrenal medulla produces the catecholamines, including epinephrine and norepinephrine, and the thyroid gland produces such hormones as T3 and T4. Finally, let's look at regulatory mechanisms that control the secretion of hormones and receptor response. Right, that hormonal feedback mechanisms are physiological processes that are influenced by their own products. In positive feedback, the hormonal pathway is reinforced by its own products to ensure additional secretion. This type of feedback is relatively rare. For example, past a certain threshold, circulating estrogen triggers events that ultimately increase estrogen release from the ovaries. In negative feedback loops, physiological products inhibit the hormonal pathway to halt further secretion. For example, testosterone limits its own secretion via its effects on the hypothalamus and pituitary gland. Hormones can also influence their effects at target tissues by altering the number or affinity of receptors to regulate receptor response. In upregulation, the presence of a hormone increases receptor response. In downregulation, receptor response decreases. This concludes our diagram.